In 2021, The Guardian came out with this article talking about Noel Clarke, who starred in Doctor Who as Mickey Smith for several years, started his own production company called Unstoppable, starred in several high-profile TV dramas, made some films, accusing Noel Clarke of groping, harassing and bullying over 20 women. And then over the weeks and months after the publication of this article from The Guardian, he was dropped by the BAFTA Fellowship because he was meant to be, well, he did end up getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from BAFTA, which prompted the release of this story. A few months later, it was followed up by The Guardian that Noel Clarke was accused of sexual harassment on the set of Doctor Who. And it has been over 4 years because Noel Clarke decided to sue The Guardian for libel for publishing this story, claiming that it wasn't he was being defamed, that it wasn't in the public interest. The Guardian took him to court over the past few months, and I'm very late covering this, but we got an outcome in August. Noel Clarke lost his libel case against The Guardian over the sexual misconduct investigation. The High Court rejects actors' claims that accusations against him by more than 20 women were false and part of a conspiracy. The Guardian has successfully defended a libel action brought by Noel Clarke over an investigation in which the actor was accused of a sexual misconduct by more than 20 women. In a landmark High Court judgment handed down on Friday, Mrs. Justice Stein rejected Clarke's claims and ruled the newspaper had succeeded in both its defences of truth and public interest. Clarke had claimed the allegations in the Guardian's investigation were false and that he had been the victim of an unlawful conspiracy. In her ruling, Stein said she accepted some of Clarke's evidence, but overall I find that he was not a credible or reliable witness. His general pattern was of only being prepared to admit that which was established by documentary evidence which he had carefully studied, and even then only to the minimum extent shown. She said there had been no conspiracy to lie, and the conspiracy claim did not have a proper foundation. Catherine Viner, the editor-in-chief of The Guardian, said of the outcome, "The judge ruled in extremely clear language that The Guardian's reporting was substantially true, and our belief that the reporting was in the public interest was undoubtedly reasonable. This judgment is a deserved victory for those women who suffered because of the behaviour of Noel Clarke. Going to court is difficult and stressful, yet more than 20 women agreed to testify in the High Court, refusing to be bullied or intimidated. This is a landmark judgment for Guardian journalism and for investigative journalism in Britain. It was important to fight this case. This was a deeply researched investigation by some of The Guardian's best reporters who worked diligently and responsibly. The judgment is clear that our investigation was thorough and fair, a template for public interest journalism. I hope today will give encouragement to other women in similar situations who have been too fearful to raise their voices for fear of the consequences." In her judgment, Stein said there has been much reference to an anonymous email campaign making false allegations against Mr. Clarke. If there was such a campaign, and it seems BAFTA may have received some vitriolic anonymous emails, it was not something to which any of the witnesses were party. While one or two of them wrote anonymously to BAFTA, the matters they raised were true. She said Clarke's case that there was an unlawful conspiracy, quote, was born of necessity in the face of the large body of witnesses giving evidence against him. There has been no conspiracy to lie. In the absence of a conspiracy, Mr. Clarke's case that more than 20 witnesses, none of whom are parties to have a stake in this case as he does, have come to court to lie is inherently implausible. Clarke, 49, had said he would seek £70 million in damages if his libel lawsuit was successful. And in September, it was announced that he would have to pay The Guardian an initial £3 million in legal costs after losing his libel case. Noel Clarke has been ordered to pay The Guardian an initial $3 million towards the legal costs. Stein said the total legal costs incurred by The Guardian had been increased by the conduct of Clarke and his legal team. Stein said there was something the claimant has to bear responsibility for. So because there was no conspiracy, and Clarke basically made it the root of his campaign and his defence that there was a conspiracy, basically lying to the judge and lying to the court, he needs to pay because you wasted the court's time with this avenue. The judge gave Clarke 28 days to make the payment. It's been over 28 days, it's been over a month, it's been nearly 2 months since this article came out, and I don't really know what's happened there. It doesn't seem to have been any sort of substantial follow-up, at least the follow-up that I've seen. But yeah, if you want to read the full High Court judgment, they do have a 224 in-depth look at all of the evidence, all of the witness testimony in over 1,000 different passages and different segments. If you did have a spare afternoon free and wanted to read Justice Stein's 224-page summary, it's very well indexed here if you wanted to. Or you can a lot easier, read the 4-page summation from the Courts and Tribunals Judiciary. So it was a 6-week trial from March 5th to April, and the hammer came down, metaphorically, in August. The court considered the evidence and determined the facts in relation to pleaded allegations relating to 22 women. The court considered that overall Mr. Clark was not a credible or reliable witness. The court found for the Guardian in relation to each of these allegations, save to the limited extent that the allegation in respect to Louise Irwine was rejected. A few aspects of the allegations in respect of others were not established by the Guardian, and the court considered that Mr. Clark was not in the position of power vis-à-vis Mrs. Morris and Miss Lucy, such that his established conduct was not an abuse of power or professional misconduct. So this one, you are able to go through this and search for Morris, and you'll be able to find this extensive breakdown of what he's accused to have done to Morris. But according to this, because he was not abusing his power or authority, because he was not in a position of power vis-a-vis with Miss Morris or Miss Lucy, that it was not a abuse of power, but the abuse still happened, if that makes sense. The court concluded that instances of each of the behaviours identified in the meaning of the first article were established, and the findings were more than sufficient to show that the meaning of the first article was substantially true. This first article here, sexual predator, it was found in a court of law that this article was, quote, substantially true. The meaning of all 8 articles, so there's this one, sexual predator, there's this one, accused of sexual harassment on Dr. Who's, that's including a few other follow-ups as well, also found to be substantially true. The Guardian established that the true defence applied, and so the libel claim fell to be dismissed. The court heard oral evidence from a bunch of witnesses. Serious harm. The Guardian conceded that the first article is likely to cause serious harm to Clark's reputation. That kind of goes without saying. As the claimant had not properly pleaded the facts and matters relied on to satisfy the Defamation Act in 2013 in respect to the second or 8 articles, nor adduced evidence in respect to the harm attributable to those articles, the claim in respect to those articles failed for safety to satisfy the serious harm requirement. What's interesting about this is how quietly, since this happened in August 2025, it's such a conservative culture war talking point about being assassinated and cancelled in the media because of accusations like this. And while there was a big, hubbub about this when the hammer came down in August 2025, very little has actually been said since. Like, it just seems that Noel Clark, apart from starting a YouTube channel apparently, which I've not checked out and I'm not really going to check out, hasn't really said anything more about this. I think that he's had his time in court. He's having to pay the Guardian millions of pounds towards their legal fees, and that's kind of it. His utility as part of the culture war, in terms of cancel culture, in terms of supposedly false allegations, that time is basically gone. And you can kind of imagine that if he hadn't had taken this case to court, if he hadn't have tried to prove his innocence or proven his supposed, the supposed conspiracy against him, if he hadn't have done that, he could have had quite a nice, cushy gig on Talk TV. He could have had a quite nice, cushy gig on GB News. Although, of course, having a black man from a working class background be a part of GB News or Talk TV is basically against their remit as point of principle. But when it comes to just general pundits online, like, I did that video reaction to Gobster when he got very, very angry about me talking about Sophia Myles. I've not even seen Sophia Myles say anything about this. I know she has me blocked, but has Sophia Myles said anything, considering that she went to bat to talk about and defend him? Has that happened at all? But you go onto Gobster's YouTube channel, and he made that response video to me, and then I did one in kind as well. But you go on his YouTube channel and you search Noel Clark. He wished him happy birthday 2 years ago. Before Russell Brand, there was Noel Clark. Noel Clark drops his lawsuit against BAFTA. That aged well. I believe Noel Clark is innocent. Also aged well. Noel Clark's adventures in cancellation from time and space. That aged well. Noel Clark needs to be treated right. People are talking about justice for Noel Clark. Was Noel Clark treated unfairly? You bet your ass he was. Happy birthday, Noel. Gobster only likes Noel Clark because he was accused of sexually harassing and sexually abusing women. That is the beginning and the end of why Gobster defended him, and that was why it was part of the culture war talking point for that. So the fact that he's not said anything about this since, the fact that Gobster, one of his biggest defenders, has just gone completely quiet is very, very telling to me. It just kind of shows that, no, like, his part in the culture war that he could have utilized, selfishly, I guess, has been and gone, and that no one really cares anymore. Which, it kind of speaks to the mic drop, the finality in terms of proving this has done for the Guardian case. Noel Clarke loses libel bid, rest is entertainment, Noel Clarke loses to the Guardian. You've got my video, he needs to get in the bin. Yeah, you don't find any sort of like punditry, or at least very little. Maybe if he wasn't a black working class actor, maybe Nerdrotic or Geeks and Gamers would have maybe dug their heels in. Because they've done it with other people before. Crying out loud, you're seeing this right now happen with Trump. They're going to bat for the world's most famous paedophile just because he's making the brown people go away. And they're pretty explicit that that's what they're wanting to do. But no, there's nothing here, which is really interesting, even from Gobster. If Noel Clarke hadn't taken The Guardian to court, he'd have his own grifter podcast by now. He could have done what Russell Brand did. He could have done what Andrew Tate did, possibly, maybe to a lesser extent, because, like I said, a guy from working class background, black actor, and, the conservative movement doesn't like any of those things. They love the sexual harassment, but they hate the working class and they hate the black actor part of it. Maybe Noel Clarke understood that he didn't quite tick those boxes, Maybe I could be reaching here. I just find that really, really interesting. The fact that they went to bat for him so hard, not because they believe in the truth, not because they actually believe in justice and integrity. They went to bat for Noel Clarke to a massive degree because he was a sexual predator. That's why they defended him the way that they did. And now he has lost the libel case to such a thorough degree that they found that the accusations were substantially true. Like, this is such a slam dunk against him that his position is basically untenable, and because his position is untenable, he's been dropped like a stone from being able to rely on that audience base anymore. When it comes to reactionaries and conservatives, what I've noticed is that it really does come down to preference when it comes to certain categories. There was a big hubbub earlier this year about the TV show Adolescence. And Adolescence, it's not a perfect series, and I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all in regards to talking about the manosphere and misogyny and violence against women and stuff. I'm not saying that at all. But it was a big water cooler moment. It was a big moment in terms of the entertainment industry and the media industry more broadly tackling this topic. And what you found with Adolescence, in my opinion, the most underrated episode of Adolescence, and I swear that I am going somewhere with this, when it comes to Adolescence, the most underrated episode is the one that's set in the school. It's the one that is least removed from the child killer at the center of it, from Stephen Graham's father character. It's the episode, however, that I think is the most vital and empathetic episode, because it goes to the kid's school and how difficult it is to thrive in that environment, how overfilled those classrooms are, how those teachers are really struggling with these students. And it kind of makes you realize that kids in that environment, how are they not, like, how aren't more of them, murderers at this point? How aren't more of them troubled? That's the really empathetic episode of Adolescence that really resonated with me. However, because the center of the series was a young white boy, conservatives denounced it because they saw a piece of media that was actually quite empathetic to young boys, to young children, young men who are struggling in this society, but because they hate black people more than they care about lonely young men, they lambasted Adolescence. It's all about trying to pick your battles. They hate black people so much that they wanted to lambast Adolescence despite it being about a topic that they supposedly care about, caring about young men or young white men. In this context, in Adolescence, they ignored a sympathetic and pretty nuanced, in my opinion, look at young lonely males, struggling young men, and they decided it wasn't for them because they wanted to push the narrative of black people causing stabbings and crimes. Their racism was so overpowering that they decided to completely throw away their advocacy for young men. I think that's a really fascinating bit of mental gymnastics. It's why you get the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who, which apparently is anti-man. It hates men. It hates men, especially the viewer. But some of the nicest and most grounded and well-rounded characters in the Jodie Whittaker era are the men. Graham O'Brien is like one of the best characters of that era. Dan Lewis and Graham O'Brien are obviously the Chris Chibnall middle-aged man stand-in characters who you're meant to have empathy and connection to. But because they hate women so much, they will completely ignore the positive male role models of the Chibnall era of Doctor Who, because they hate women more than they want positive representation for men, if that makes sense. Nerdrotic invites Noel Clarke as a guest, imagine. I honestly wouldn't put it past him, but I think because of the definitive nature of this, that opportunity's gone. I keep saying it. I'm glad he did, because it meant that these women could get some form of justice and have their time in court and have their stories heard, and that Noel Clarke can be punished for it. Also, Gobster, I remember him saying in his reaction video that, he wasn't abusing women. In fact, some of the people who came forward, some of them were men. We looked into it at the time. He was making that up, but it's fun that there are no men speaking up against Noel Clarke in terms of allegations of harassment and abuse in this High Court judgment. So he was making stuff up so much, he was just inventing male victims for them to get mad at, whatever. I think that's funny, in a really morbid sort of way. If Noel Clarke hadn't have had his day in court, he could have had like those manosphere, reactionary, conservative grifter like appeal. He could have done that. And the fact that he didn't, talking selfishly, a bit of an own goal for him. Obviously, he shouldn't have done those things. I'm just speaking like, if I was Noel Clarke, what would I do to get away with this? If Jimmy Savile was still alive right now, he'd have his own Talk TV slot. He'd have his own show on GB News talking about cancel culture. I'd bet my life on that. If Harvey Weinstein was not in prison, he'd have a conservative radio show. 1,000%. No doubt in my mind. Because being pro-sexual predator is more important to these people than anything else. It's why they're going to bat so much for Trump right now. He'd be talking to Jeremy Kyle. He would. Do you consider Dan Lewis a positive role model? Yeah, he's down to earth. He's nice. He's got a really sweet will they won't they with Diane. Yeah, he's a good character. Like he's not complex or in depth. But for the story he's in, he's fun. And he goes to a food bank and donates, and he's nice at trick-or-treaters. And he's got a good dog. A positive role model doesn't necessarily mean a complex role model. I'm glad that this did have its day in court. If you do want to read the summary or the full 220 plus page High Court judgment, you're more than welcome to. I'm just curious if Sophia Myles has said anything since. Not obviously, what happened with Noel Clarke doesn't begin and end with whether or not Sophia Myles has anything to say about it. I'm just curious. And also whether or not Gobster is going to actually own up, whether or not Gobster's going to have a follow-up video, or maybe even some sort of an apology. That would be the day. But like I said, what they really liked, what conservatives loved about Noel Clarke, was that he was a sexual predator. They just know that because it's been proven, they can't run with it. Like they like the idea of him being one. They just don't want to face up to the idea, the truth, according to this court deposition, that he is one. And I think that he deserves to be thrown in the bin. And I hope he loses all of his money to The Guardian.